I'm looking forward to our town hall event on October 16th, 9 a.m. Pacific time and 12 noon Eastern time to discuss the different economic plans, particularly the tax plans of the two presidential candidates. I wanted to give you a little preview of what we're going to be talking about, some of the major talking points that these candidates are emphasizing, and also some that they are not emphasizing that I think are really important to understand. Let's start with Trump. Trump is talking about across the board tariffs, anywhere up to 20%, with an excess tariff of 60% or more on goods imported from China. What effect will that have? What effect could that have on inflation? What effect could it have on the availability of goods? Will it do what President Trump suggests, which is bring manufacturing back to the US, or will it simply raise prices? We're going to look at all aspects of the Trump tariffs because that is how he's proposing to raise the revenue to pay for the continuation of his 2017 tax cuts. He also wants to further cut taxes on things like manufacturing, where he'd like the corporate tax rate to be as low as 15% on certain manufacturing. He wants to exempt taxes on tips. He wants to exempt taxes on Social Security income, and he wants to bring back the state and local tax deduction. We'll talk about those. We'll see, is there good policy behind it, or is this simply a matter of saying what people want to hear? And talking about saying what people want to hear, let's turn to Vice President Harris. She has some similar proposals. For example, she also wants to exempt taxes on tips. She wants to give a $25,000 first-time homeowner stipend. And whether she'll do that through a tax credit or send out money, how she's going to do that, we don't really know. How will that $25,000 of new money for first-time home buyers, how will that affect the market? How will it affect home prices for not just the first-time home buyers, but for everybody who's not a first-time home buyer? Let's say you're a second-time home buyer, you don't get the credit, but now you're competing for that house with the first-time home buyer who gets $25,000 credit. How will that affect? Vice President Harris has proposed a $50,000 tax deduction for startup expenses of a new business. We'll talk about the consequences of that. Her most notable tax policy is the capital gains tax proposals, increasing the capital gains tax rate for anybody who has taxable income in any year over $1 million to 33%, which would include business owners who sell their business to retire. So we'll talk about the effect on business owners. There are other capital gains tax proposals from Vice President Harris that she's not talking a lot about, like a capital gains tax on gifts and a capital gains tax at death to be in addition to the estate tax and the gift tax, or a capital gains tax on like-kind exchanges, real estate 1031 exchanges, only exempting the first 500,000 of capital gains from a like-kind exchange, or taxing the recapturing 100% of depreciation at the ordinary income rates, which would be upwards of 45% versus the current maximum tax rate of 25%, 28 point. We're going to look at what's going to be the effect on inflation, not just of President Trump's tariffs. We'll also look at the potential effect of inflation on the tax on the rich. This is one thing I'm not hearing anybody talk about. And I think it's a very important question to be examining. And that is, if you take money from the rich who typically invest that money, it's not going to hurt their lifestyle. If you take that money that would otherwise be invested, so we're not looking at, oh, the poor rich. No, we're not. So no violin for them. Sorry. But what does it affect? Will it affect inflation? Because if you're taking it from the investor class, which another term for the rich, and give it to the consumer class, will we have another run like we had after COVID, when we had all of the new money put into the economy by the government delivering stipends or gifts to the general public. Will that happen again? If that seems to be what stimulated inflation post-COVID, will this have the same consequence? So we'll examine that. I think these are very important issues to be looking at. And I think that a lot of them aren't getting a lot of play. If you look at, for example, Vice President Harris's economic plan, you don't see a lot about these capital gains tax increases. You see tax the rich, but that's about what you see. You see a lot about all the child tax credits and all those benefits, the consumer spending side, getting the money to the middle class or particularly the lower middle class. You're seeing a lot of that in your economic plan. You do not see a lot of discussion about the taxes. On the Trump side, again, not a lot of discussion about what will happen when those tax cuts are extended. Will that stimulate the economy? Will that affect inflation? What will the effect of tariffs be? And that protectionism that Trump is proposing. So we're going to look at both sides. There are proposals on both sides that, frankly, I think are good. And there are proposals on both sides that I think are ridiculous. I promise I won't pull punches. I will do my best to give a fair analysis from a tax accountant's perspective. So join me on October 16th, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, and we'll have an in-depth discussion of the economic plans, particularly the tax portions for both former President Trump and Vice President Harris.